Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Marnie Falk, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mitochondrial Medicine Frontier Program at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We're really excited to celebrate together with you during Mitochondrial Disease World Awareness Week, this special event. It's our fourth annual Next Generation Therapeutics virtual panel to discuss mitochondrial disease therapies together with biopharma partners, advocacy partners, and directly with families. It's a wonderful opportunity to connect all key stakeholders in the community, and we're really excited that you can join us today. Today's event, perfect, as you can see on the screen, we're honored to be sponsored by outstanding colleagues in the field, particularly those developing therapies and delivering therapies to individuals with mitochondrial disease. Our presenting sponsor is UCB. Our platinum sponsors are Summit Health, Precision Biosciences, and Tecento Therapeutics. Our gold sponsors are Stealth Biotherapeutics, Larimar Therapeutics, and Reneo Pharmaceuticals. And our supporting sponsors are IMEL Biotherapeutics, Chemistry RX, Sale Therapeutics, and MitoLife Therapeutics. And just from this list, you can see how far we've come with the number of companies beginning to make major movements towards delivering effective and safe therapies for people with mitochondrial disease. To jump into today's agenda, I'd like to give you an overview of what we'll be sharing today. So after our introductions, we have three outstanding panel discussions, and the intent is to answer the questions from the individuals attending today, as well as those questions that were submitted in advance. Our first session is run by my esteemed partner, the Clinical Director of the Mitochondrial Medicine Frontier Program, Dr. Amy Goldstein, who will be talking about clinical trials. Second will be our Clinical Research Director, also in the Mitochondrial Medicine Frontier Program at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Dr. Zarazuela Zolkoply Cunningham. And finally, our last panel will be on emerging therapies, led by our esteemed colleague and collaborator, Dr. Philip Yeske, himself an experienced chemist in this space, as well as the Science and Alliance Officer of the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation. Before we begin, I do want to remind people in the Philadelphia area that this weekend, many Philadelphia buildings will be lighting up green in celebration of Mitochondrial Disease Awareness Week, so we can put that in the chat so everybody can be aware. We also want to remind people that throughout this week, there were events to celebrate and educate on mitochondrial disease to further awareness, and we held a full-day symposium on Monday. Those seminars were all recorded and within a few weeks will be live on our mitochondrial medicine website at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to be shared with all those who are interested. Before we begin our first panel discussion today, I'd like to introduce Sarah Nguyen. She's our clinical research program lead, and she's going to just give a very brief overview to show you some of the ongoing trials that are open right now, in which people can ask to learn more and participate if they desire. Again, a huge improvement thanks to the many people contributing to this effort. Sarah?
Hey everyone. So these are our ongoing studies. We have several exciting projects and trials in the pipeline for the near future. As of today, we're still very excited at these very active and ongoing studies. The first two are randomized drug clinical trials that are now approved and running along very well at our hospital. If you were interested, please click on the clinicaltrials.gov link to learn more about these different trials. And then we are also available to take any questions, comments later after our discussion for those who are interested in learning more about these studies. Then we are also conducting a nanosensor technology validation study at our hospital as well. We are looking for affected patients and healthy volunteers to support this research at our hospital. Again, please click on the link if you're interested, and I myself and our research team are readily available to address any questions and to have further conversations.
Thank you, Sarah. And we'll put in the chat this information. Colleen can put that there, as well as your email, if that's okay, if people have questions. But there's a lot going on. And so we want to make that available to all those in the community, both patients and controls who want to participate. So now I'm going to turn it over to start our first session, Dr. Amy Goldstein discussing the status of clinical trials. Thank you, Dr. Goldstein.
Dr. Goldstein, I think your audio.
I think we have a problem, Dr. Goldstein. Your video is blinking on and off. Colleen, are you seeing that too?
Yes. If we could also have those that are on panel 1 to turn off their video and microphone.
Turn off or turn on?
Turn on, sorry.
Sure. Will our panel 1, there we go, members join? Thank you. Oh, Dr. Goldstein, I don't think we hear you. I'll join back in. I don't think, Dr. Goldstein, the audio is working. Maybe you can switch back to the computer. So while I'll take over the introductions while Dr. Goldstein's coming back in. Chad, will you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, happy to. So thanks for coordinating this event and having us. My name is Chad Glasser. I'm the Senior Director of Clinical Research at Tisento Therapeutics. This is actually a very exciting milestone for us because this is, I think, the first external meeting that we've been able to participate in as Tisento. We're a very, very new company. Our website was actually just launched yesterday. It's tisentotx.com. So those of you that are listening, I encourage you to check that out. But we're dedicated to advancing our lead clinical asset, zigosiguat, as a potential treatment for patients with knee loss. We are coming off the heels of some really exciting and very encouraging data that was generated in a small pilot study, and are excited to further evaluate that molecule in an upcoming phase 2 proof of concept clinical study. So again, thank you for organizing and for having us here.
Okay, terrific. And Susan, will you introduce yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfect. Oh, we did hear you, and now you're muted. And you've disappeared. We have the glitches working early this Friday morning. Dr. Goldstein, are you back? I see you're still muted. Oh, now we see Susan. Hi, Susan.
It re-invited me into the meeting. I'm doubly blessed, I guess. So thank you for inviting me. Susan Bender, I'm a program physician at CP Pharma, and I'm working on a program for a primary mitochondrial myopathy, PK2D. It's a pleasure talking with this group because I always learn when I talk to patients and to clinicians. So thank you.
And then we also have Sarah, who you just met on the panel. And lastly, we have our patient panelist, Dr. Falk, Amanda Loveman. Amanda, if you want to introduce yourself, and we'll introduce Sarah. Amanda?
Okay, thanks. I was making sure you hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my name is Amanda Loveman, and I live in Yardley, Pennsylvania. I'm 44 years old, and I have what they typically call Sando, and it was diagnosed officially about a year and a half ago.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Marnie.
Dr. Falk.
Oh, thank you for joining, Amanda. We're really grateful for your time. Are you able to stay on? I just want to make sure we don't lose you.
Yes, yes. Can you hear me? And everything's fine?
Yeah, you actually, your audio is great and you're not on video. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me on?
If you're able to join video and you feel comfortable, that would be wonderful. If you're not able to, audio is fine.
Okay, let's see. It's not available for FaceTime, so we'll just do this.
Okay, thank you so much. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself again? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Sarah. I'm a clinical research lead here at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. I support, collaborate, develop, and lead different clinical trials, different research projects in our mitochondrial medicine department. Ultimately, I really see myself as an advocate for patients, such as Amanda, who I've come to develop a really great relationship over the past year as she supported our program as a patient and her family as well. So excited and very honored to be part of this panel.
Terrific. Well, the intent of the panel is really to allow the families and the pharma to communicate directly. Oh, I think Dr. Goldstein's back on, your official moderator. Dr. Goldstein, can we hear you?
I hope so. Can you hear me now?
Okay, perfect. Your timing is impeccable. So if you want to go ahead and take over, I think all the introductions are complete. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much. Sorry for all the glitches. And thank you to all of our participants for being here this morning. So I first wanted to ask Chad and Susan to talk to us from the industry perspective, because we are very, very excited to have industry-sponsored trials at this point in time. But we know that there have been challenges in getting those underway. And we wanted to ask you both, what do you think the biggest challenges right now in developing drug therapies for mitochondrial disease, and how do you propose that we overcome those challenges as we move forward with clinical trials? And Chad, I'll let you go first.
Sure. So yeah, lots of challenges. It's hard to pick just one. I think if you really think about it, I think a buzzword that you hear a lot in rare disease, and specifically in MELAS, which is our interest area, is heterogeneity. And I think obviously the best way to overcome that is to enroll a large number of patients, but that's not really something that we can do in rare disease. That's really the best way to remove some of that variability. So our team is trying to think through ways of doing that as we design our next study. I think the first way is potentially study designs and ensuring that patients their data is used as efficiently as possible. And one way to do that is to use them as their own controls and try to remove some of that variability. There's a number of study designs, a crossover design, which we typically see as one way of doing that. And there's opportunities for patients to also receive drug at some point during that controlled period. And you can actually look at changes with treatment compared to changes with placebo. And I think obviously access to study drug is a key part of a successful study in a rare disease. I think we think a lot about defining our patient population really well. I think a lot of other studies have been quite broad, and I think the way we're trying to target our strategy or our next phase study is really to determine what true MELAS is, work with the experts in the field and kind of get general consensus of what our definition of MELAS is right now, both genetically and phenotypically, more importantly phenotypically, and use that to kind of define our study population. Obviously not too much, so we can still enroll it, but to a point where we do have a little bit more homogeneity there. And I think the last point is the endpoints. There's not a one size fits all because of the heterogeneity. And so thinking of ways that we can kind of create more flexible endpoints or a grouping of endpoints. Sometimes we hear about the most bothersome symptom as being an interesting way to measure a change in disease, and we can allow the patient to kind of select a few of the concepts that are most important to them, and allow them to report on that over the course of the study. So lots of things that we think about, lots of challenges as we design our next study, but I think if we do it thoughtfully, we'll hopefully get a good signal at the end of the day and not succumb to the heterogeneity that we all worry about in rare disease.
Yeah, thank you. I think you just made some really excellent points. We're trying to focus on, a single phenotype, but really understanding even within that phenotype, there's some variability, and people may have different worst symptoms for themselves. And the other thing I've really heard from our patient population is that in any clinical trial, they really would like access to drug at some point during the trial. And not placebo only. And I think that those are all really helpful points to make, and allowing the patient to help identify what is their worst symptom, and coming up with, some outcome measures to perhaps measure that and follow that along in the trial. Those are all really important points. Susan, how about you from the UCB perspective? When you're looking at designing a clinical trial, what do you feel are the big challenges that we're facing?
So, yeah, thank you, Amy. Disorders are very much rare diseases, and drug development in a rare disease on its face is really no different in terms of the goal than any other type of disease. You want to prove a benefit and an acceptable safety profile. The how is where it gets very challenging. The heterogeneity is a huge piece. These tend to be diseases that occur across the lifespan. It's not just in pediatric patients or adolescents or adults. It's a lot of different patient groups. And for most of the diseases, we're not terribly clear whether it's the same disease in children and adults. Beyond that, one of the things that Chad talked about, how do you measure that benefit? What do you choose as an endpoint to say, if we show change, that is a positive benefit, right? For a pediatric patient and an adult patient. That kind of leads into another challenge, which Chad alluded to, is there's not a whole lot of patients. The patients that are available are very geographically dispersed. And when you start narrowing your population by saying, okay, I'm just going to study pediatric patients, you may have cut the patient pool into a third or less. So, it's trying to put all the pieces together to ultimately have a successful study. The last thing anyone wants is to have patients participate and not be able to interpret the results.
Susan, I'm so sorry. Oh, Susan, we're losing your audio. I wonder if maybe you want to try shutting off your video to see if your audio is stronger.
Okay, hopefully this will help. Essentially what we want to do is get the right pool of patients with the right endpoint so that we can understand the results and clearly show the benefit and the safety of the drug.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. You brought up some other very good points. Again, noting that these are rare diseases and that we're with a limited patient population. And then you also brought up several times, the concerns about safety. And I think that, that's also another big issue that we need to go back to, right? Making sure that we don't introduce something new into this population that's going to have some adverse effects, and we need to be tracking those adverse events very carefully. And then you also brought up the challenge of making sure that we have selected the correct outcome measures. And I think that that's also very important. And for you, especially with the disease that you're dealing with, the dichotomy of knowing that this disease may look very different when we're talking about a young child versus an adult, and the outcomes that we use for those two populations may be vastly different. So these are challenges. We have some very clear challenges, and I think it's also been a struggle for all of us to make sure that the FDA realizes that these are the challenges that we're working under. So my next question for both of you is, how can we, all of us, right, the patients as well as the clinicians and the caregivers, how can we help in either the development of these clinical trials or in making sure that we present the best case forward for the FDA to get these drugs approved? What do you need more from either the patients, the caregivers, or the clinicians? And Chad, I'll send this back to you.
Yeah, so I think my answer is pretty simple. I think when we talk about risks internally at Ticinto, we always talk about recruitment. And I know we worked with CHOP in the past for our pilot study, and it is challenging to find patients. And again, when we are focusing more on a phenotype and a MELAS subtype, it does become a little bit challenging. So I think Amy said, like, safety is paramount, and making patients feel comfortable that they're not a guinea pig in a study, and that the drug that is being administered has been very well studied and has the potential to provide benefit. So I would just encourage everyone to get involved. We have some interesting patient interview work that's coming up very soon, going back to my point about the endpoints, not really having a well-defined endpoint in MELAS. We need to do a little work to really define what that is and use the patient voices as like a core part of that. So we're going to be kicking off a series of interviews with MELAS patients, and I would encourage anyone that's listening that has that diagnosis, or if you know of anyone, to send them our way. We'll be sharing additional information once that study is up and running, but we want people to participate in that and share their story, because it's really going to be incorporated into our clinical trial. And then obviously the trial is the next phase. We'll take that endpoint and the questionnaire that we are aligned on and put that into our clinical study. And we need patients in that study. And going back to my previous comment about all patients having access to active study drug, that's something we're considering. There's going to be an open label extension at the end of the controlled period, so patients can get access to the drug for a longer period of time. We're trying to make it as feasible and as simple for patients to participate in, make it decentralized so the study can be brought to them in their home, remove all the excess burdensome endpoints, and really focus on the things that are going to get us past the finish line. So that's what we're trying to incorporate. And again, we just really, really need patients to be open and willing to participate and have faith in us in conducting the study. So.
Excellent, thank you. I love the idea of conducting the patient interviews to really understand the patient story and hear the patient voice. And you also mentioned something that we know is important to our patients as well as to our study team, which is considering how many visits are going to be involved in the study and those type of details. Yeah, Susan, how about you from UCB perspective? How can we be helpful, either the patients helpful for the design, or us as the clinical team?
So the clinical team, you educate us, or in TK2D, you are, and letting us know, what the disease is, what's relevant, is the way that we're looking at it appropriate. Hearing from the patients, it's one thing for me to say, if there's a patient that's on a ventilator for less hours, that's meaningful. But if a patient doesn't say that, then how can my job? So it's coming together to understand, from a patient perspective, what a drug do, And from a clinical perspective, what is the disease? What do you want to see? And then can we study it? Another big way for patients, especially I think, to be involved is to educate and to talk to the FDA. And there's various channels to do that. But trust me, the people at the FDA are not experts in MELAS. They're not experts in thymidine kinase 2 deficiency. They need to know what the disease is so that when they're evaluating study results and whether we've done enough to show benefit, they'll have an idea of what to look.
I want to go for is, coming to members of our team and asking for that education. We spend a lot of time learning about these diseases, spending time with our patients to really try to know these diseases well. And I think it takes this true partnership between us. We can let you know what we know about these disorders and what we feel is important. And then I'm always humbled by our patients to hear what's most important, right? Because sometimes what I think is causing the most issues with quality of life is not the same as what patients tell me. So I think it truly takes all of us together to design treatments for so I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and ask Sarah some questions because we are lucky to have Sarah on the call, and Sarah as one of our top clinical research coordinators and the project manager here that really works hard to kind of gather our patients and help with the recruitment effort. Sarah, how, at the beginning, I think we had very, very little in terms of clinical trials, and I just wanted you to talk for a moment about how this has changed over time. Even over the past few years, we've had a number of trials and research options available. And at the beginning, we had, very little to offer. And now it feels like we have almost even conflicting trials and studies to offer our patients. How do we help our patients choose which one? And as a community, are we getting better at listening to our patients and understanding the burden of being in a trial? How do we help our patients understand what being in a trial is about and helping them make decisions about participation?
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. Great questions. So regarding your first question, it is a good problem to have, what we're experiencing right now. Multiple clinical trials approved and active at our hospital at the same time. How we have been trying to provide multiple options and treatment, investigational treatments to our patients has been a truly collaborative effort. We routinely meet every week to go over clinical trial updates internally with our physicians. When we see patients in clinic, we are able to be fully informed and share the differences in our clinical trials to our patients. We also provide guidance or recommendations on what trial we think are best for certain phenotypes or for, certain genotypes in our patient population. And then we try to provide all the information, all the details we can to our patients, taking the time to address their questions, their concerns, and fully involving them, giving them the information and the autonomy and agency to choose the right clinical trial that they want to participate in. And then to answer your second question, Dr. Goldstein, and I think Chad had articulated this so well earlier, the clinical trials today are so different from 5 years ago, and they continue to evolve. We have found that new evolving models of clinical trials, especially after COVID, have really supported more of a decentralized, hybrid, remote visit type of design, and that has really allowed more patients to get exposed, more motivated to participate. It has resulted in higher patient engagement as well, more diverse study populations, then also alleviated burden, not only on sites, but also for our patients. Even the most deeply motivated patients who want to support a clinical trial, they also face challenges. They have full-time careers, they have families, And so to be able to have a flexible clinical trial model has really given us a tremendous boost in having more patients, more diverse patients across all of our clinical trials and research areas.
Thank you, Sarah. You hit on so many really good points when considering, how do we talk to our patients about participation and what the companies have done to kind of help ease that burden as well. So we are lucky enough to have Amanda Loveman on the phone with us, and Amanda has introduced herself as a person who is living with a mitochondrial disease and also participating in a clinical. And Amanda, I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell our audience here today what it's been like for you participating in a clinical trial, both the pros and the cons, what have been the challenging aspects and what have been the benefits, and anything that you want to let us know about participation.
I guess I'll briefly go over, I was diagnosed about a year and a half ago, after several years of having these mysterious balance issues and neuropathy and things like that. And so it was quite a devastating diagnosis. Basically, they told me that I'd be in a wheelchair they didn't know if it would be like a couple years or 5 years or 20 years. So, and I was always a very active person. I'm not that old. I'm 40, I don't think, 44. So I got on the trial. I think it's been actually very easy. They've made it I think having a driver is huge because I was having a lot of anxiety driving. And so just to have that as an offer was game changing. Like if I would have had to come in on my own, like drive myself, like I still would have done it. It would have been much more difficult. I was very nervous about the injections, but they're really not that difficult. And I'm kind of weird about needles, so that was fine. I guess the biggest challenge for me has been that this drug, now I'm not even, I can't even say with certainty that I actually have it, but I'm assuming I do because the improvement I'm seeing is so subtle. It is the same subtleness. It is the same subtleness in which I declined. So, over 7 years or whatever, you see little changes. And it's like some days are good, some days are bad with a decline. But now I'm starting to see little changes with an incline. So I'm getting better and better. I still have bad days, and there are days I feel like, do I even have this? Am I even taking the drug? But then a week later, I'm doing things I haven't done. And it can be kind of frustrating because I think we're accustomed to, in this era in history to have a result immediately. I take a Tylenol and the headache goes away in 30 minutes. This is not that. And I think I'm almost certain I have it because I'm seeing improvements, within weeks. Sometimes I go weeks and I think, man, am I taking it? But then all of a sudden I'm more myself, So if you have any specific things that you want me to discuss.
I love what you have said so far, Amanda, and I love that you feel at times that, you must be on drug because you feel better. So my question for you is when you come in and we are doing measurements to see if we can measure how much better you're doing, do you think we're doing the right test to measure that? Are we capturing it?
I think the walk test. That is, you're having people with balance problems kind of doing that turn. I think it would be more, I don't know how you would even do this, but I think it would be more effective. Everything's so subjective. Sometimes I come in and I do the walk and I can feel myself. I'm it's like I'm scared. Like because my balance isn't that great. But then sometimes I come in and I'm like feeling confident and I'm walking well. So I guess my subjective feel about the walk, even though that sounds silly, that's huge. Whether or not I feel confident walking that I'm not going to like fall. But the turns really slow it down, and I don't think it's able to show the improvement at the level that I think the people are feeling, right? So, because you can only go so fast. So I thought of that, like I thought, man, if I didn't have to do those turns, like, not that they really slow me down, but it's like, I think I'm going so much faster, doing so much better, but it's not significant on a chart. I don't know exactly. You mentioned to me last time we were in an appointment about doing strength training. So I picked that up. I think home, doing things at home is important. And I'm trying to think, like, I'm not sure. There's a lot of homework that I think people are overlooking. So this drug, if I have it, it seems to allow your body to do what it's supposed to do, but it's asking you to also do your part. So I notice things that if I do certain things, I'm seeing like, improvements, or I'm allowing myself to get better, and then other things where I'm like, oh, that totally messed me up. So that is like goes hand in hand. But this for sure, I feel like I guess the name of the game is patience. You just have to have faith and be patient and wait. And like, I'll think, man, I will have nothing to show for that next appointment. And lo and behold, I do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, a year ago, I was having panic attacks driving because of the neuropathy, and I couldn't back out of my driveway. And I was having trouble driving at night, and I was scared to pick up my kids, and I was taking them to basketball practice, and it was like this utter nightmare. And I've fought this anxiety for a year. Well, the last week, I have 4 kids in 3 different schools, and I'm going on the highway, and like, for the first time, I noticed this yesterday, I am working at the pace I used to. I'm driving, there's a little anxiety, but like, I am busting out, like, getting lunches ready and getting up at 5:30 and working out and doing my stuff, and I'm like, this is huge, because like, I finally feel like I'm not the lag, where I'm, God, I barely could get this done today. And so it's so subtle. And I was like, that goes off of a few weeks of feeling like, am I making improvements? But then I am. Like, I'm picking my kids up. Like, I'm making quick, I'm able to walk. Like, I still have trouble at night. Like, I start to wind down, and then, I'm not as good. But I'm taking my dog to dog training, and that's in the evening, and I'm able to walk backwards with him. There are just certain things that I see. Yesterday I was working out, and it was the first time I could do a jumping jack. And, I hadn't been. So I started doing old workouts that I used to do when I was pregnant, because they would get me through like the worst of times. So, right before I had a baby or after, and I was recovering. So it was like very basic stuff. But like, some of the things are like jumping jacks, and like, there are just certain activities I can't do. And it's very depressing. Because my upper body can do a lot, but like, it's almost normal. But my lower body can't. And it's like, man, that I can't believe it happened that fast. Then yesterday, I've been working on it. For the first time, I was able to do several jumping jacks. I'm tired, but I'm like, I'm coordinating those motions. That's huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
It's so, I
so
can
that
hear your voice. Yeah. Sorry, I can hear it in your voice that, you're really expressing that you're feeling better. And again, the challenge for all of us is to make sure that we're capturing what you're telling us. Chad mentioned how important it is to capture patient voice. And our job is to make sure that when we ask you things like this quality of life survey or a fatigue survey, are we capturing that you're able to drop your kids off faster or, kind of get back to the life that you knew before you had these symptoms. And I think it's just I'm so grateful to you, Amanda, for joining us, because what you're experiencing as you go through this trial is really important to us. And just to emphasize that at the end of the day, what we all want is to measure these improvements so that we can show the FDA this drug works. We want to get it approved. So we are now at time. I want to thank Chad and Susan and Sarah and Amanda for joining this panel. We're very grateful for your time. And thank you to our audience for participating and sending in questions. And I'm going to turn it over either back to Dr. Falk or over to Dr. Zolkifli Cunningham, who's going to lead the next session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. Thank you, everybody on the first panel. That was wonderful. It's wonderful to hear both the pharma and the family's perspective. And yes, now we're going to be moving on to the second panel, led, of course, by Dr. Zolkifli Cunningham. And we have several families joining, including a late minute. We had a switch. One of our families got sick, as happens, of course, and another wonderful mito disease advocacy partner and family member has agreed to join, Mr. Dan Wright. So hopefully, Zuela, you could go ahead and do introductions, and hopefully, I'm just going to ask Dan, are you on? I think he's muted. We'll work on that, Zuela, while you go ahead with the other introductions. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Falk. So my name is Dr. Zara Zolkifli Cunningham. I'm an attending physician, a neuromuscular doctor, and a researcher in this mitochondrial medicine frontier program at CHOP. I'm delighted to be leading this session today. I think it'll be very exciting for all families and researchers to listen about precision therapeutics. So before I introduce the speakers, I'm just going to mention what precision therapies are. So it aims for individualized evidence-based decision-making regarding therapies that are now centered on either molecular or biochemical assays of mitochondrial function or biomarkers confirmed in the laboratory or by clinical phenotyping grouping. So that one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really apply to our very, very different patients, right? Everybody's so heterogeneous. So this is truly the bench-to-bedside approach, and due to scientific and technology advances, this concept has really accelerated in recent years. I'm delighted to really introduce our panelists today. Just running through the names, and I'll let you please introduce yourselves. We have Cassie Gorsuch, who's the Vice President of Gene Therapy Discovery at Precision Biosciences. Cassie, if you might introduce yourself too.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to participate today. So just maybe a really brief introduction. Precision Biosciences is a gene editing company, and so we are currently developing a gene editing approach specifically for the treatment of primary mitochondrial myopathy in patients with the 3243 A to G mutation. And so, as you mentioned, this is a very specific approach for a very specific mutation. And so there's some challenges associated with that, but I'm sure we'll get into that. Really excited to be here, and thanks for having us.
Thank you, Cassie. Next would be Laura McMullen. So Laura works in our MitoCenter Frontier program. She is our lead clinical research coordinator. I'll let Laura just speak about what she does. And thank you for being here, Laura. I know you're away at a conference.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'm a clinical research lead in the Mitochondrial Medicine Center at CHOP. And among the things that I do, I also lead precision trials with investigational therapies for our patients. So this is really patients who aren't able to get into clinical trials, aren't eligible, and still need some benefit. So I'm excited to get into that a little bit more and talk about that with you further.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. Next, we have a mitochondrial disease parent. Is that you, Pessy? I think I see you on camera now. So Pessy Schlafrig. I will mention, though, also, aside from being a parent, Pessy really is a director of research and referrals at Chain Medical Resource, which is a nonprofit organization that supports individuals and families. Thank you, Pessy, for being here. I don't think we can hear you, Pessy. We lost you on camera. If you're... Oh, okay. So she's going to call back. And do we have Kevin Ferry?
That's me. I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Sorry.
Well,
See you.
Money. No worries.
See you for a second there. So Kevin, I'm really delighted to introduce Kevin. So Kevin is here from Summit Health Pharmacy. This is a real game changer for our Mito patients to have access to Mito supplements prescribed at our center. I have to say, Kevin, Summit Health Pharmacy has displayed extreme dedication to our patient community. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. I work closely with, my name is Kevin Ferry. I'm a pharmacist. I live in the Philadelphia area. I worked closely with Vince Canzanese, who is our founder, who really has taken it upon himself to be a resource for the mitochondrial patients. Unfortunately, he's away in Italy this week, so he asked me to fill in, which I'm happy to do. But yeah, here at Summit Health, we are a full-service pharmacy, but our main aspect as regards to today is mitochondrial supplementation and cocktails. We work closely with the Mito Clinic at CHOP and other doctors in the area and across the country, really, to provide specific compounded medications with specific ingredients at specific dosages to really give the patients what they need based on their weight or whatever they may be dealing with. So we compound those drugs and we help the patients and the prescribers navigate the pitfalls that come with the insurance issues. And, we're here to help.
Yes, and I really thank you, Kevin. That was a very nice introduction. Truly, Summit Pharmacy has been here for our families over and over again. So thanks again for joining us. Now, I think Pessy is still having a little bit of trouble. So we're going to wait for her to join. And we have a second parent representative today, but he's actually a lot more than that. We have Dan Wright joining us today. I believe, Dan, you are on audio only.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Actually, I'll let you introduce yourself, please, Dan.
Okay. Thanks. Our internet connection is not really good where I am today, so I wish I was there by video, but I'm here by phone. I am a parent of our daughter had mitochondrial disease for about 36 years, something in that range, and she was first diagnosed in 1983. And that's really before a lot of I guess some of y'all were even born, but we've been involved in the search for drugs. I've been involved with UMDF and have really enjoyed this process to see the advancements that's happening today.
Thank you, Dan, for the very important introduction. I must state you've been a very strong advocate for pushing forward drug treatment in mitochondrial disease. So thank you for joining us this morning and offering your perspective. I see Pessy here, who's rejoined. But Pessy,
yes, hi.
Great. Hi.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Do you hear me? Okay,
yes,
great. Okay, hi everybody. I'm sorry for that tech trouble.
Oh, sorry, Pessy, you're cutting out again. Pessy, sorry. We'll probably have to have you maybe try and switch your camera off again. Nope. Still not hearing you. Sorry. Okay, so as Pessy is trying to rejoin, why don't we start the discussion first and foremost? I think that would be, yep, she's left and going to start rejoining. So why don't we start, please, with Cassie? Cassie, I think we're all excited to hear about you speak more about, the gene editing platform. You mentioned primarily focusing on the 3243 mutation of mitochondrial DNA-related disorders and primary mitochondrial myopathy too, which is essentially patients presenting with predominant symptoms of muscle problems. Can you please, first of all, explain to our patient community what the gene editing approach is used in Precision Biosciences?
Sure, yeah, thank you. So gene editing is really an emerging, it's a really exciting field to work in because it really offers the opportunity to provide a one-time, lifelong, durable treatment. And so, at a high level, gene editing is really the ability to change a person's DNA. And that might sound a little bit scary, but that's the work that we're trying to do at Precision, is to ensure that we can do that in a very precise, very well controlled, and very safe way. And so the therapy that we're currently developing is really aimed at selectively removing the mutant mitochondrial DNA that exists in patients with the 3243 mutation. And so many patients we know have both mutant mitochondrial DNA and wild type mitochondrial DNA. And if that ratio of the two overcomes a certain threshold is when patients really start to experience clinical symptoms. And so our approach is to deliver an ARCUS nuclease. That's what we call our gene editor. They're called ARCUS nucleases. And so this nuclease will actually very specifically find only the mutant mitochondrial DNA, and it can cut that DNA. And after a cell experiences a cut in mitochondrial DNA, it will actually get rid of that mitochondrial DNA. It's a really unique feature of mitochondrial DNA, is that they just remove that copy of the mitochondrial DNA once it's cut. The good thing is that our cells have the ability to repopulate mitochondrial DNA. And so if we can selectively eliminate just the mutant mitochondrial DNA, the cell will repopulate with wild type DNA. And that will allow us to shift that ratio under that clinical threshold and hopefully really alleviate for the long term these really impactful symptoms that patients experience. And so that's our approach. We're developing this gene editing technology to selectively eliminate mutant mitochondrial DNA that carries the 3243 mutation in muscles, and hopefully provide patients a one-time treatment that could really be durable across their entire lifespan. So that's the goal.
That's really exciting. Cassie, can I ask you just in the thoughts of going forward, where we're not quite there yet, right, in terms of doing this in the patients, but that's the plan, to plan towards that. Do you foresee any particular phase of the disorder? Do you foresee any particular age? What do you foresee, any particular severity that you would be aiming for in trialing this in patients? And sorry, I'll just mention again, just for our patients' education, just to be clear, we're talking about mitochondrial DNA heteroplasmy levels, which, as Cassie mentioned, is the coexistence of mutant and healthy mitochondrial DNA within one cell.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. I think our approach, as you mentioned, is preclinical at this point, so we don't have any open clinical trials yet, but that is definitely the goal, is to work as fast as possible to provide this option for patients. Since we are still in the preclinical phase, what a lot of the work that's going on right now is really trying to design that clinical trial. And it was really, I think, fascinating hearing from the last panel, as you think about designing that clinical trial, really ensuring that you're meeting the patients where they are in terms of their needs and their, what's going to really improve their quality of life. And so this is a precision medicine, and so we will be looking to enroll patients with the 3243 mutation that experience primary mitochondrial myopathy. And so we're working with clinicians and patient advocacy groups and patients to really define how do you define primary? How do you ensure that the patients that you're enrolling in your trial have the right types of phenotypes so that we'll be able to measure clinical benefit in the long run? And so I think it's probably a little early for us at this point to say exactly the patient population criteria that we'll be looking for, but for sure 3243 mutation containing patients, they'll need to have the coexistence of that mutant mitochondria and wild type mitochondria based on the therapeutic approach, and then really looking to improve. Our drug is really specific to muscle, and so looking for patients who experience mitochondrial myopathy.
Thank you. I think that's very exciting. Can I first turn to Dan Wright? Dan, to ask you if you
I'm
have...
sorry.
Okay.
Dr. Zokipley, I just want to let you know I joined via phone. So
Wonderful.
We should be able to hear me now. Okay.
Pessy, thank you so much for joining, and sorry for all the audio and technological problems. Can I please ask you, Pessy, because we skipped your introduction earlier, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, hi. So I'm a mom to a 15-year-old daughter who has a single large-scale mitochondrial deletion. I'm also a patient advocate. As Dr. Zokipley mentioned, I'm director of research and referrals for a nonprofit who tries to advocate for patients. And I'm an extremely passionate parent about drug development and pushing it forward, both financially and having my daughter participate in clinical trials. So I'm very excited about this conference today.
Great, thank you, Pessy, and thank you again for being here today, making the time. Did you hear what Cassie was discussing about mtDNA gene editing?
Yes, and that's very, very fascinating. Kathy, I'm just wondering if I could ask you another question. Are you going to be going forward with this, or is this just one point mutation? Do you foresee that helping in other mitochondrial diseases?
Yeah, wonderful question. Thank you for that question. So we've started, because of the nature of our gene editing approach, each therapy is really tailored to a specific mutation. And so we've started with 3243, but we do believe that we could use this therapeutic approach for a number of different mitochondrial mutations. And so I think we're really looking to continue to learn from the field of, where would we go next? What type of mutations should we target next, and where's a really big unmet need in the space? I know there's a lot of patients who aren't going to fall into that 3243 category, and we'd love to be able to continue to develop our editing technology for other mutations as well.
Perfect. Pessy, did you have any other questions?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Kathy.
That's great. So Dan, can I ask if you have any comments or thoughts on what Cassie's just shared?
Oh yeah, yes I can. I've been watching this side of this field for a long time, and I'm very, very excited. Our daughter had a 14459 mutation, which again we watched. The ratio of mutant mitochondria increase over the years, and something like this, again realizing that the initial work wouldn't help her, but watching any progress in this area, I think it's phenomenal, and again these diseases can sometimes can be very rapid and sometimes can be very slow, but any progress in regard to the side of it, I'm very excited to see the work on just the pure mitochondrial mutation.
That's right. Very well said, Dan. I think that Cassie, I'm interested to hear what Laura has to say. Laura really has been working tremendously hard. I have to say tremendously hard. She's been amazing at getting our expanded access programs, natural history studies set up in our center, and really making sure I've watched Laura do it over and over again, pushing forward access to pre-approved investigational drugs outside of the clinical trial setting to some of our patients. So Laura, this is fascinating what we're hearing about gene editing. Clearly, this has been very different to what we've been doing all this time. Can you please share your thoughts and what you might think would be, any hurdles, any hesitancy from the patient community in participating in a trial like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've definitely had quite a range of therapies that we've used in precision trials with investigational medications. And really it's just having the background information on safety and efficacy. And I think once that preliminary information is set, even if it hasn't quite gone through the FDA approval process yet, once we have some phase 2 trials showing that this is safe, we have some long-term safety data, and we have at least some preliminary data to show that this works. I think we've seen a lot of enthusiasm on the patient side for having something to try, and really kind of having the framework that we have set up within CHOP to be able to offer an investigational therapy pre-approval, and be able to follow some of those outcome measures over time. And I think, what we heard in the panel earlier and what we're seeing over and over is that as researchers, we keep missing the mark over and over again. What are we trying to make better? And then we hear back from the patients that that's not actually what they're prioritizing. So with the precision therapies, we're really able to get a little bit more granular in a fun way. So we've gone as specific as I want to be able to mow my lawn. Like, hey, did you mow your lawn this month? And be able to track that over time, which is not the kind of precision that you can have in a large scale clinical trial.
That's it. Just to share with the audience and with our panelists today, precision really is what Laura works really hard on. So she's mapping out patients' change or no change over time. And so I did just like, Laura, some of you have heard her talk on Monday, but I'd really like you to just share what we mean by precision, what we mean by following and tracking our patients' phenotype and biochemical markers over time.
Yeah, so precision really is about the individual. While clinical trials are looking at the broader cohort and are we showing benefit in a large group of people with one particular phenotype or one particular genotype over time, in precision we're looking at the individual, what's happening to you, and we are able to do that with customized outcome measures based on either the phenotype that we're looking at or this particular patient or this particular drug. And we have a lot more flexibility in kind of adapting those over time based on what we see. And of course, getting the patient feedback as well. Are we capturing it? Tell us what's happening. Tell us what's working. Tell us what's not working. And being able to look at those biochemical markers as well, some of the more objective markers, physical therapy. We heard from Amanda earlier, sometimes the walk test is not necessarily capturing changes in balance. Can we look at balance? Are there changes in balance on investigational therapy? And yeah, I think that's really what precision means to me, is looking at, this one patient and what their experience is.
Excellent. And I think it would be fair to say that this is a very important effort that really can be set up in any mitochondrial center in most medical centers around the country. Would you agree, Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. We are really lucky to have incredible pharma partners, as you heard Dr. Falk talk about earlier. And that's really, we wouldn't be able to do this without those partnerships. So I think that's really the crux of this, is having pharma who are very busy on their clinical trials, their drug development, to take a step back and offer pre-approved treatments as part of either open label trials, expanded access, single patient, emergency or non-emergency use, with the kind of common goal in mind of helping these patients that don't have access to other therapies. And we really believe that is a kind of 360 partnership where we're able to get the medication, offer it to patients, collect efficacy data, and then hopefully feed that back to support the new drug applications for pharma. So yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that other institutions can set up, and the best way to do that is building these relationships with pharma and continuing to kind of foster those partnerships over time.
Terrific. Kevin, can I ask you, and we're going to really call upon you now to speak on something that we've been doing as our standard of care for a very long time. In fact, we started off with measuring precision based on mitochondrial supplements. So I'm going to share with you, can you please share currently with our standard of care and what we're prescribing in our patients, what is the biggest challenge truly, unduly, to get these medications to our patients?
Well, in my experience, it's been the relationship between the Mito Clinic and the pharmacy is great. The communication's there. We're able to get the patient what they need, but the problem would be the insurance aspect of it. A lot of these medications are quite costly. We compound Mito cocktails that could have anywhere between 10 and 20 ingredients. So there's a lot of, it's a minefield. Basically, when we get the order from the doctor, we're building a compound that is customized to that patient. That compound is for that one patient and no one else. So that takes some time. We then have to submit that to the insurance company, who can basically, they can deny it or they can approve it. I can tell you that on that first claim, they never approve it. It's never approved. So it's basically just an understanding that we have to work with the patient, the prescriber, and the insurance company to work the process. It's important not to get bogged down or discouraged, because if you work the process, the prior authorization, the appeal, usually you can get a good outcome. Not always, but usually. So in my opinion, that's the biggest hurdle. The biggest hurdle would be just dealing with the insurance company, not getting frustrated, knowing that if you maintain open lines of communication with your prescriber, with your insurance company, that you probably will get a good outcome if you're willing to do the work and maintain those lines of communication.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And Kevin, can I ask you, this is really related to this focus of today, which is precision therapies. Mm-hmm. And so can you just explain, please, if there are any hurdles and what happens when the provider alters the components of the mitochondrial supplements? Commonly, based on advancing research, we make changes to what we prescribe, and this might very well be individualized based on the genomic data that we have or the biochemical assays that we have, very much based on what Dr. Falk does in the laboratory, for example. What happens when providers alter the prescription? Might that threaten the insurance approval that's already existing and in place?
Yes. So when an insurance company approves a medication based on the work that we do with the prescriber and the patient, any change in that formula can void that previous prior authorization. So basically what ends up happening is you have to start over. It's important to understand that we can get it approved again in a lot of cases, but not always. But it's just going to be, more of a headache. And it's just understanding that you have to kind of play this game with the insurance companies. And I look at the insurance companies as a partner in this situation, because it's easy to see them as the enemy. And I get it. But they really are. They have a process in place to cover these medications. They're quite costly. They can be quite costly. So having to do it all over again can be frustrating. But if you work with them, you work their process, we can get a good outcome most of the time. I would say that in addition to the fact that you change an ingredient, most prior authorizations are only good for about a year. So you can expect this to have to be done again at some point in the future.
Yeah, it's not an easy process by far. Tessie, can I ask if you have any comments on what Kevin's just shared from your experience?
I just want to say that this is something that I've utilized, and the process through Kevin and his company has been amazing. So, I think it's a great resource, and the fact that they deal with the insurance company directly has been amazing.
Yeah, it really is fulfilling for us. Number one, and it's especially fulfilling when you have a patient who buys into it and they're taking ownership of their health or their child's health, because it's a partnership. I mean, we can't. There's only so much the insurance company wants to hear from the pharmacy. They also want to hear from the patient. They also want to hear from the provider. And if you all work together, it may take a few weeks, it may take a few months, but you can get the medication covered. I mean, I've sat in on appeals processes with patients, and once you have a patient explaining what's going on in their life, and you have the pharmacist explaining how that medication could help them with that situation, most insurance companies are going to provide some flexibility there.
And I'll just say this, just because, you know, part of what I do is patient advocacy. We've sometimes had to go all the way up to like the insurance chair of the commission and the state assembly of whatever, you know, state you're on. But sometimes if you reach out to your assembly person or your state senator or whatever it is in the insurance or state regulated, we've had success that way, in which they've actually, you know, advocated during the appeals process, because most of the time if it gets denied twice, it goes to external appeal, right? So that's
Correct.
when, you know, the state assembly person could get involved, that's New York State, and advocating and saying this is something rare, this is something the child needs, etc.
Percy, I'm hearing you very much say and share with the families it's important to advocate for yourself, right? This is what the message is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially, you know, when somebody's diagnosed with a very typical disease, as difficult as it is, there's so much out there. There's so much, I'd even like to, in a certain sense, compare it when a child is diagnosed with childhood cancer, right? So there's so much advocacy, there's so much support, there's so much know-how, there's so many clinical trials, there are drugs available, even though it's a horrifying experience for families. But in many of these ultra-rare diseases, I know in my line of work, right, and I deal with a lot of patients across a large spectrum of the community. My child was the first one that I knew ever diagnosed with this type of disease. So it was devastating for me per se, but also I didn't even have the resources, and I didn't even know who to reach out to, and I didn't even know, like, what could we do to make a difference, and who are the advocacy groups that we could actually, you know, involve in the process. So it's been a game changer and an eye-opener for me, and how much, you know, especially in our rare disease space, how much it's important for the patients and the parents to advocate. I'll say this, I've looked into other rare diseases who've gotten to the point of actually having approved therapeutics. Most recently with certain mutations in like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And it's always been the parents who've been on the forefront to push that through. So I think as a parent, we have that obligation, whether it's financial, whether it's just advocacy, whether it's just raising your voice and letting people know we need therapeutics for these children. We need therapeutics, whether it's children or adults. These are diseases that people live with. These are the diseases that, right, is more common than what previously thought. How many kids go on for years undiagnosed? And how important it is for us to raise our voices collectively.
Absolutely. Really beautifully said, Percy. We hear the passion in your voice, and just speaking from experience. I'm going to turn back to Cassie now. I think it'd be really, just to wrap up this session before we close, it'd be really interesting to hear, Cassie, you've now heard the patient perspective. You've heard from our pharmacists prescribing the general challenges of prescribing what we consider our current standard of care, which is evolving itself over time. What do you think you might be able to say to the families? What would they be able to help do in terms of helping drive forward new therapies, you know, with really treatment of them in mind?
Yeah, I think I'll first start by saying it's been just really inspiring hearing from the parents and from, you know, this community that is really very passionate, very dedicated, and committed to you know, improving the life of their kids and patients with these mitochondrial diseases. So just really inspiring to hear about all of the work that goes on, you know, behind the scenes, day in and day out, to try to continue to provide better options. You know, from our perspective, I think you've heard earlier about building those relationships, building those networks with patients, with families, with patient advocacy groups, with clinicians. And, you know, I really am focused on the preclinical side. And so I'll even say, even within the research community, I've been really pleasantly surprised isn't the right word, but just it's been a really great experience working within this community. Everyone is so passionate and collaborative, and it's a challenging therapeutic space because it is, you know, such a heterogeneous patient population with lots of different mutations. And while we're focused on one right now, we want to be able to impact as many lives as we possibly can. And so I think, as we continue to push forward on the preclinical side, working towards that clinical trial, I think, from our side, we just really look forward to continued engagement with clinicians and with patients to really make sure that we're getting this right. We're getting the clinical trial designed in a way that's going to be accessible for patients and that's going to be successful on the back end, because we're really hearing the voices of the patients and what they need for improvement in their quality of life. And so I think it's been as I've been listening and thinking, what are we going to need going forward? It's continued communication, it's continued collaboration. It sounds like there's a lot of enthusiasm for progress in the space. And so, we'll be looking for volunteers to participate in our trials. And I'll just start, by saying thank you for inviting us to be here. Thank you for hearing about our therapy, and thank you for hopefully one day, participating in the trials as we move forward. And so just really looking forward to continuing in the community.
That's great. Really, thank you, Cassie. Just 1 minute. I'd actually love to close out with Laura. Laura, can you just make a comment, please, on patient enrollment for clinical trials in general and precision therapies?
Yeah, so we had a great comment in the chat that we have patients who would love to participate in research, but have issues either with mobility or travel. And I think, enrollment in clinical trials is a very narrow space, and it needs to be in order to do the type of tightly randomized controlled trials that are needed. But it's really difficult because it's a very small portion of our population that are eligible for these clinical trials. Happens all the time. You walk 1 meter too far, too healthy, 1 meter too low, and you're not healthy enough to be in the clinical trial. So we're really looking on ways that we can not only expand enrollment in clinical trials, but offer other pathways to patients as well.
Wonderful. Perfect. And with that, I will have to say thank you very much to our panelists, each of you, for being here, for just providing terrific perspectives and explanations to our patients. And really just thank you for keeping and remaining engaged with our patients and families. Okay, great. So we can now move on to the next session. I'll hand off to Dr. Falk. Thank you very much, everyone.
Terrific. Thanks, everybody. Clearly, precision therapies are a part of our future, and it's really exciting to hear all the different perspectives on how we're going to get there. Our next session and our final session is going to be run by Dr. Phil Yeske from the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, a long-standing CHOP partner, and of course, an advocate for therapies everywhere. So Phil, I'll share this share it over the session to your advisement, and you can introduce all of your participants. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Marty. I mean, always honored, flattered that you asked me to participate in this. It's, as a parent who lost a child to mitochondrial disease nearly 2 decades ago, it's so exciting to just see the level of activity that's taking place. And now in this panel, we're really going to talk about the emerging aspects of that. So really looking forward to digging into that with our panel. So it looks like we have everybody on camera and ready to go, which is great. So why don't we start with a quick round of introductions. As I said, I'm the Science Alliance Officer at the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation. I'm responsible for our research mission and how we deliver it, but also very active on the Alliance side and just making sure that we're connecting all the dots in the world across all the stakeholders to ensure that we get to those treatments and cures that we all want for mitochondrial. So with that, I'm going to maybe ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. I'm going to start with the 2 parents that we have with us today. And first, Ashley Rowland, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Rowland. I have a daughter. She's 5 years old. Her name is Aubrey. She's affected by mitochondrial disease, and her specific type is caused by a gene called AARS2. And I also have a son. He's unaffected. I live in New Jersey, and we also go to CHOP. We see Dr. Goldstein. I also have a foundation called Cure ARS. Cure ARS is funding research and supporting families with the genes that end in ARS. So AARS2, there's a DARS2, there's a CARS2. It goes down the alphabet. We also have a project going on at CHOP around treatments for those genes.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. Really look forward to hearing more of your perspectives here as we're going on. Brett Cohen, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, did we lose Brett?
I think Brett needs to be unmuted.
There you are.
Perfect.
Alrighty. So my name is Brett Cohen. I have a lot of kids, but I have one who, my fourth son, Josh, who's 9.5, is affected by a nuclear mitochondrial mutation. It's the DLD gene, dehydrolipoamide dehydrogenase. It's been sort of an unbelievable journey. He's still with us and very, very much with us and happy and amazing. I have kind of been around the world looking for treatment modalities for him. We go to CHOP for him clinically. We've also done with Dr. Goldstein and all of the amazing people you've seen today, and then some more. So he's followed there. We've done some research that we worked on that we helped try to fund at CHOP, creating disease models with worms and and then fish, which Marnie really loves the fish. And then at one point I got excited about a treatment modality that I found out. I started a biotech. So this was like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I started a biotech company to try to push it forward. Ultimately, it didn't really work. It worked in cells, but not so much in our knockout, our little Joshy fish and worms. It didn't work so well in those, and so we didn't push it forward because it would have been massively expensive. So that's kind of my background.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Brett. I mean, both you and Ashley are, two examples of just fierce patient advocates that are really trying to do something right around this topic of emerging therapies. So again, look forward to digging into more of that as we move through the panel. So our other two panelists are representatives from companies that are developing emerging therapies and making progress towards that. So I'd like to introduce first Janice Karamidjian. Janice, maybe you could briefly introduce yourself.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting MitoLife Therapeutics to this panel today. It's very important that we get our message out to all of you, and I'm glad to be that representative. I am the Executive Vice President of MitoLife, and our focus is to target the underlying molecular mechanisms of mitochondrial dysfunction and to manage those symptoms, to slow disease progression, and to ultimately help patients lead better lives. We're committed to making sure that our focus is not necessarily on a cure, but we're looking for a legacy company, meaning we can make short-term advancements to help patients that are afflicted today and make those lives better, and then take that, build upon that, and hopefully for the future, make advancements that are important. So thank you so much for inviting us. And I think Cassie took my notes right out from under me. So Cassie, good job. But it's been an incredible week with Mito Awareness Week. We've had the opportunity and the honor to meet parents, patients, and organizations that are so incredibly committed to this cause, and I'm just honored to be a part of it. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, thanks, Janice. You're right. It is great to be able to do this as a part of World Mitochondrial Disease Week, and you made a important connection there around mitochondrial function dysfunction that we're undoubtedly going to come back to here in the context of emerging therapies.
Yes.
So our final panelist is Sandeep Dugar, and Sandeep is with Rarefied Therapeutics. Sandeep, introduce yourself. Nope, sorry, you're still muted.
That's the classic thing, isn't it? You're on mute.
Somebody had to do it.
So appreciate the invitation, Phil, and really a pleasure to meet everyone on the panel and, of course, all the participants, and to really take the process forward, the concept forward of what Janice said. You know, I've been in this pharma world for 35 years and in the mitochondrial area for the last 15. And I've worked with Marnie on a variety of projects. And our main goal is to really look at the concept of mitochondrial diseases from a phenotypic systems approach, because the idea here is that the mitochondria is the only organelle in your system that has the capability to really actively adapt and respond to challenges, even including its own genetic mutations. So it's a very interesting organelle, and our approach is to really look at helping patients currently. While long-term therapies are being looked at, I think there is sufficient evidence to suggest that diseases associated with mitochondrial mutation or other secondary mitochondrial effects of other diseases can be managed quite well. And I think there is a really good opportunity for us to bring in this knowledge of understanding of the mitochondria we have today and the scientific development that has already happened over the past so many decades to bring it together for very near-term therapeutics for these patients.
Great. Thank you, Sandeep. Yeah, it's a second mention, right, of the central role of mitochondrial function in human health and disease. And I think we'd be remiss not to kind of come back and talk about that a little bit more in the context of emerging therapies. So thank you for the introductions, panelists. We have about a half an hour. I think there's a lot of ways we can talk about emerging therapies. I'd like to spend a little bit of time around some of the scientific and technical challenges. And again, we've already heard a little bit about that from a couple of the panelists. But also some of the business challenges, right? Because I think we have to have our eyes wide open as to mitochondrial disease as an attractive investment opportunity and business opportunity for developing therapeutics. And of course, do want to make sure that we keep that patient perspective kind of central to all of this as well. So before we get started, I just would like to remind the audience, those attending, we'd really like this to be interactive. We have some kind of questions queued up, but we'd very much like to hear from you, what you'd like to hear from these panelists. So please use the Q&A function to enter your questions. I'll keep an eye on that while we begin this conversation. So maybe let's come right to it, since I've now touched on it a few times, right? This, it probably comes under the category of more of the science and technical challenges, right? And so something as complex as mitochondrial function, right, and just the role that mitochondria play. Sandeep, maybe you could elaborate just a bit more, right, on this systems approach, right, and how that might elevate the emerging therapies from more of a single gene, single mechanism, and thinking more about holistically about mitochondrial function and how that might lead to more therapies for our patients.
Right, Phil. So I will attempt to do that, as you can imagine.
I try to do that in about 2 minutes, right?
Yeah, no, and we all understand that the mitochondria is Creo. I mean, genesis of life is based on mitochondria. The concepts of what mitochondria does is used universally by every living species on planet Earth, including plants. So, but the essential part is that when the mitochondria are affected through either a single gene defect or through secondary insults, they adapt to situations very rapidly. So unless a mitochondrial deficit is embryonically lethal, the system is already adapting to deal with it. As Brett mentioned, his son is 9.5, happy, but he has an underlying deficit, but his body is dealing with it. One of the concepts that we're working on is, can we help his son and others to deal with it better? So do we have to have a curative intent right now? I mean, the classic example I give is HIV, right? I mean, now people live with HIV for the rest of their lives. It's a nuisance, but it's not debilitating and people are living with it. And Phil, you addressed the other key component is access and affordability. I mean, Paul Farmer very astutely mentioned that finding a therapy should not bankrupt families, right? So we cannot come up with therapies 20 years hence that cost $3 million. Yes, it's great therapy, but how many of us can really afford those kinds of costs? So one of the components that we're looking at is a system holistic approach. It's the idea that can you provide the mitochondria stability to the insult, to deal with the insult that it's responding to on a chronic basis, and give it the resources. And if we believe in the concept that bioenergetics and energy rules the universe, right, then that philosophical concept could be realistically brought to patients and say, let me provide you with the support you need. And that's what Stratify is about. I mean, to me, I've worked with so many wonderful KOLs and clinicians and scientists. And again, the aspect keeps coming back. Can we support and help? And the answer is yes. And that could lead to near-term therapies that are affordable, that people can have access to. Yes, it's not curative. And one thing I would say is that sometimes, as you mentioned early on, Phil, that the mitochondria is such a complex organelle. I mean, its conversations and communication within the cell is so diverse, but it's not stuck, it's adaptive. And so for us to try and think that we can address all these adaptive phenomena that the mitochondria can do through very specific siloed approaches, I think will require many decades of questions to be answered.
Yeah, so I think a couple of key points out of that, right? One, recognizing the dynamic nature of mitochondria and the fact that that's both a challenge but also an opportunity, right? Yes. For us to look for a lot of different mechanisms and way to modify mitochondrial function that ultimately can lead to improvements in health, right, for our patients. You know, the second point you made there, around near-term accessible therapies, right? And I'd really like to get our parents' perspective on this here in a second. I often think about therapeutic development, mitochondrial disease, as it's not a, one approach is going to solve everything. It's just impossible in something as complex, right, as mitochondrial disease, genetically diverse, symptomologies so diverse. So, having a nuanced tier approach to emerging therapies where we can have some resources and companies focused on, near-term opportunities, relatively low-hanging fruit, right, that are meaningful to the patients, while we continue to focus on those ultimate curative on the spectrum technology, some of which we heard in the last panel discussion. Ashley, I'd like your thoughts on that, as a parent of a child affected by mitochondrial disease. Does that speak to you? Yeah. Does that
it does.
Motivate you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I got her diagnosis, we're told she's rare. She's one of, so many in the world. But mitochondrial disease as a whole is a little larger. And so, but it seems like a lot of the research is very siloed into different areas of mitochondrial disease. And in my mind, that could take a really long time to find a treatment. So when we started our nonprofit, we wanted to just fund research to finding a treatment and a cure, but we knew the cure was more of our long-term goal. And the treatment was more of like our short-term goal because we want to help kids now. We want to help families now and adults as well. So for me, I want to help the patients that are affected now and in the future. So, and I want to help my child. So, that does speak to me as a parent because, obviously you want to do anything you can to help your child. You don't want to see them suffering. You don't want to see them get worse. So finding a treatment that could stop that from happening would be amazing, would be a miracle,
Yeah, like stabilizing, slowing down the progression of the disease, right? These are all important milestones, right, along the path to, the high impact, disease modifying, right, type of therapeutics, again, that everybody wants. But we also recognize they require the longest time investment, and it really comes back right to the business side of the discussion as well. Kudos to you, Ashley, for really recognizing that silos are always a major impediment, right, to effective research and effective therapeutic development, and that to be collaborative is really the key, right, to have greater success. So a really good insight there from you. Brett, again, you were, I've known you a long time, and I know you swung for the fences, right? You said, I've seen a modality that I think can really help my son here right now. And you, in your introduction, you even spoke to how your own thoughts have changed over time, right, about this. But I'd like to get your thoughts on sort of this tiered approach to emerging therapies and what that means to a parent of a mitochondrial disease patient.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a tough space, right? Just, I mean, the big picture, and everyone sort of articulated it, is you've got however many mutations, whatever, 500 mutations, super heterogeneous, and then you don't have a ton of patients in each one, right? So it's just like just by way of background, like that's an incredibly difficult thing relative to something where there's lots and lots of people and they show up similarly with like a similar phenotype or whatever. But that's like just already, that's incredibly difficult scientifically. It's incredibly difficult economically, right? So there's lots of labs, thank God, and there's lots of scientists who think they may have a signal somewhere. But if you think you have a signal with something that affects Alzheimer's, right, a very tough condition also, like that affects tens of millions of people. If you think that you have a signal that affects, whatever, the mutation in 323 G to A, where there's like 50 known cases, it's like very hard to get, like, so it's a little bit of a lonely road, right? Because like, who's going to fund it? Like, who cares besides the other parents? And then the sort of mito community, it's hard to get. So that's thing one. And then, Phil, you can tell me if I'm addressing what you're asking, but I mean, I think, it's very hard with these silos because, like, years and years and years of research for something that has just so few, that doesn't help everyone. So this relates back to what Ashley and Sandeep were saying, which is, if you could find something that is mutation agnostic, right, that helps, right? So for me, if you had something that completely cured one mutation or 100%, or you had something that helped every mitochondrial mutation 10%, I'd take the latter, right? In other words, if there's something, especially because there's a funny thing where if your mitochondria is functioning, there's some sort of critical mass where even if it's functioning at 25% and you can get it to 35%, right, that could be a massive difference in terms of like phenotype. So I guess I'm kind of talking all across the board, but I would say like one thing is if you could have something that is like, mutation agnostic, that would be spectacular. So
yeah, I'm reminded of a conversation I had earlier this week with an industry stakeholder that was discussing therapeutic response groups, right? And I kind of like this description, right? That we move away from saying it's this specific gene or this specific phenotype, right, symptom, but rather what are the group of patients? What's the cohort that responds, right? And that we're thinking across this spectrum, because when we try to get too fine and think about it, a single gene causing a single disease, something as complex as mitochondria, that invariably seems to come up short, right? There are things going on outside of that that we just don't yet understand. Really speaks to the systems approach, that Sandeep mentioned as well early on. Janice, I'd like to kind of pull you in here as a relative newcomer, right? I guess by definition in emerging therapy, but MitoLife, a relatively newcomer here to the mitochondrial disease space. Maybe speak to what attracts a company like yours to work on mitochondrial disease, but also what, eyes wide open, what are some of the key challenges that you see emerging companies facing trying to develop therapeutics for mitochondrial disease?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. In our short experience, what we're finding is through history, this space has been overlooked and underfunded. But over the past 30 years, it's been an exponential climb to awareness. And that really, again, is due to the parent organizations that are out there championing not only their own children, but all of the other children that are also affected. It is an incredibly strong community. And, the feeling that it takes a village to raise a child, this actually takes an entire world to make any kind of incremental change to this. And happily, we have, I think, the right people in place that are doing just that, but it is driven by the parents. There's no question about it. The challenge is coming up with the right and key components that convinces investors that it may not be happening to them right now, but it's going to happen to them either in a family matter or in a adjacency where they're going to know somebody that is afflicted, whether it's a rare and orphan disease in a child or whether it's an older parent with Alzheimer's like what I'm facing. It's going to affect everybody. And I think it's very narrow-minded for investors to not think that it's not going to, because it's going to. And so here's an opportunity for them to learn more about the space, to think much more objectively and openly about their own future, about the future of others by doing something that is so important. They may not understand the complexities of it, but as we start to develop therapies and as we start to show them that small incremental changes are building blocks to much bigger changes along the way, they can get in on this now and make a difference, as everybody has said, that near-term change and that near-term improvement is gigantic to the community. And then they take that and move that forward to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. So it's a building block.
Again, I think this is a really important message to send. I know a lot of our attendees are parents and patients themselves, and that this is very much a message of hope, right? That there's a lot of work going on in the space. Yes, there's still a lot that we don't know, but we are chipping away at it through all these collaborations, parent-driven research, and foundation-driven research, and ultimately therapeutic development companies, right, is what it's going to take to get this broad suite of mitochondrial therapeutics that we're going to need for something as complex as mitochondrial disease. So yes. Thank you for sharing your thoughts there. Ashley, I'd like to just kind of come back to you, as again, a parent was motivated enough, right, to form a foundation and kind of jump in and say, we want to make a difference here. You feel you're sufficiently informed, right, on what's taking place in the mitochondrial disease space, or is there more that could be done, right, to help parents, right, that are interested in advancing therapeutics? Is it an education matter? Is it a resource matter? I'd be interested what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I think there's always room for more things to be done. There is a lot that has been created, especially by UMDF, Phil, by you guys. You guys have created a lot of resources, but I feel like there's still a lot, like even when we went around trying to find researchers who were interested in these genes, there's not a clear indication of who's actually doing the research. And a lot of times what I found is that researchers are kind of very protective of their work, which is a normal thing, but then you just don't know who's doing what. And so we literally just pulled, I don't know, hundreds of papers and just looked for emails and emailed everybody we could possibly find.
Right.
And, I just feel like there's no clear place for parents or for patients to go and say, type in your condition or your specific type of mito and try to find information on that. I mean, most of the information is in research articles, which is really hard for, parents and other people to truly understand what it's actually, relaying to them. And so I feel like there's still a lot that can be done. But, when we started the nonprofit, we wanted it to be more holistic approach. But a lot of researchers were like, no, we only want to research one gene. So, and we're thankful for like CHOP, because CHOP is doing research on all 19 of these genes. And we're more open to doing that. And so I feel like as a parent, there's still a lot that can be done, but there is a lot out there. And maybe patients don't always know. I mean, I know when I first got the diagnosis, I wasn't made aware of UMDF and some of the foundations out there. I kind of found it on my own through patient groups on Facebook and social media and things like that. So it takes a little bit of digging to find some of those resources.
Yeah, we've come a long way, right? Again,
Yeah.
I think 20 years ago, that word mitochondria, was almost a conversation stopper, right? But mito what? But now it's becoming more of the lexicon, I'd say, of just the general population, right? There's a recognition that you want to live a healthy life, healthy aging, take care of your mitochondria. The best way to do that, eat well, exercise, right? But we know for our patients, right, with these genetic defects, that's not enough, right? And that's why we need these therapies. But, a lot of your comments remind me of the diagnostic journey, right, that goes to getting to a diagnosis of mitochondrial disease. There's this sort of wandering in the forest that has to take place to find the researchers that are working on what I'm interested in. What's the science that's relevant to my child, my loved ones, of mitochondrial disease? And it's a really good point that there's more we can do. And I kind of take that back even at UMDF to think about how we can improve upon what we have. I do want to mention that we have a page dedicated to clinical trials, both ongoing and what's coming, umdf.org/clinical-trials. I encourage everybody to use those resources to find out how you might be able to participate in clinical research and if there's something taking place that is relevant to you. Brett, I saw you nodding your head, when Ashley made these comments about, the time it takes to find the researchers. I know you went through a lot, right, to find the right partners, right, with your vision of trying to find a therapeutic for your son. Maybe you could just comment a little bit on that.
Yeah, it's a crazy world out there, right? So I mean, so it's been I've learned a ton. So I mean, I'm trying to think of where to start. I mean, the way that I think is best probably is to read like lots of papers on PubMed, but that's not going to be. And it's funny, so it really resonated when Ashley mentioned that, and I emailed I would show up at their doorsteps for the scientists who were, and they must have thought I was out of my mind, right? So, but like not everyone's going to do that and have the gumption to do that, and also I just like even like understanding these papers took, I wouldn't claim to understand them now, so it's that's a hard. It's like that's a hard road, and you have to be very motivated, and to the extent that you can have resources like the UMDF where people can just kind of plug in a little bit more and know what's going on, that's great. I'll also say, just for parents, I mean, this was a surprise to me also, because I was just such a I put like people doing research for rare diseases
Okay.
like this and scientists on such a pedestal. And the truth is, they're also, they're, there are real live humans as well, so they have real needs. We need them, but also they need patience.
Right.
They need money. Every single researcher I've ever spoken to, by the end of conversation 1 or conversation 2, says, "Can you help me with funding?" Right? And that doesn't make them bad. It's just so. It's a complicated world out there, and I feel like parents, especially parents who, they've got a sick kid, let's just say, I mean, it's a very vulnerable population.
Yeah, it really is a process of aligning incentives, right? You, as a parent, are highly incentivized to try to develop treatments for your loved one, right? For your son, your daughter. For the companies, they're highly incentivized to find KOLs and clinicians that can conduct their clinical trials. And certainly for the clinicians and the researchers, it is about they're highly incentivized to find funding, right, to continue the research. So I think that's part of the role we all can play, right, in connecting these dots and trying to get these therapies developed. All right, panelists, we have maybe 10 minutes left. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat board here from the organizers to make sure, but I want to make sure we have a chance to kind of talk more about the business side of this, because ultimately therapeutics are developed and commercialized within industry, within pharmaceutical companies. Janice, maybe your thoughts on where this space, mitochondrial disease, rare inherited forms of mitochondrial disease, is right now in terms of, is it ready for that infusion of capital? What's, again, your perception as you've gotten to know the mitochondrial disease space, right? Are we ready to have that hockey stick of growth, in your opinion?
I do, absolutely. I think that we are primed to do just that. The interest level is incredibly high, and there hasn't been anybody that I've talked to or been in contact with that doesn't give the nod to tell me more about it. Even on our own SAB, we have the finest clinicians that are committed to moving the agenda forward, and everybody that they talk to is also in that same space. So it's ready for the big infusion. And again, as I was saying earlier, and Sandeep, I'm sure can also add to this as well, I don't think anybody's not talking about it in some form or another. If you present it in a way that is very personal, they understand that it is really a platform for all living organisms, that it's going to affect, it does currently affect human life and longevity, however you define that, whether it is for a rare and orphan disease that is a shorter lifespan, or, Phil, to your earlier point, just living a healthier life. I don't think anybody's going to say no. I think it's really the right time, and I would invite Sandeep to elaborate on that.
Yeah, Sandeep, I really would like to hear your thoughts. As someone that's been involved in startup companies, but also venture capital-backed companies, there's a wide range of business approaches, right, that can be taken to starting a therapeutic development company. How do you see the mitochondrial disease space right now?
Yeah, and so Phil, thank you, and Janice, good start up to the discussion. One of the things is, after over 35 years in this business, I've realized that there is a very significant commercial and financial aspect to this industry, right? So that's clearly the case because the risks are high and the timelines are long. And one of the parts that we are really trying to tackle and come up with is, can we mitigate the risk? Can we shorten the timeline? And does that translate to affordable therapeutics? So there has to be a paradigm rethinking about, does it really take $1 billion to get a drug out there? And the answer is no. And does it really have to cost $300,000 a year for therapy? And the answer is no. And the issue here is that, and let me be a bit stark and blunt, perhaps a bit controversial, because, and I have done this, that whenever we go out raise funding, The first slide is always there's 9,000 rare diseases, 400 million patients, how big an unmet need. But the last slide is always how many $1 billion will it make, right? So along the way, it has transitioned from a significant need to a multiplicity of dollars. And I think that's the part we have to contend with. Right. That can we really say to investors, see, to be sustainable, it has to be investable where people can make money. At the same time, it has to be affordable so patients can go buy. And I think that we need to also get away from the idea of intellectual hubris we live in, that for some reason we should know everything about what we do. Right. No, our system is far too complex to understand everything. A gene mutation in one particular aspect has a reverberating consequence. Unless it's phenotypically, embryonically lethal, it will do it. So for us to think that we can explain everything from mechanism of action is there. So Phil, to point, if we knew everything about the drug, repurposing wouldn't exist, right? Repurposing only exists because there are drugs that were released 40 years ago that have new indications they didn't understand 40 years ago. And that would be true today. We would find things work today, which we will find new uses. So one of the ways we need to think about is how can we take this knowledge and repurposing, re-understanding, and coming up with therapeutics that gives meaningful return to investors and a very meaningful outcome for patients. And I think we can do it. We have to create a new system of interaction between patients, clinicians, investors, and most importantly, translational people. If you look at this discussion, we talk about clinical research, we talk about early research, but the real work happens in the middle, the translation of that research into a clinical outcome. Yeah, and we need to engage translators into this whole equation to make something happen.
Yeah, well
I think
said.
There's opportunity here we really can work on.
Yeah, huge opportunity, and boy, I couldn't think of a better sort of final comment there around the importance of that middle ground, right, of translating from the lab, right, bench to bedside, something we think about a lot. So thanks for bringing that up. But panelists, we could talk about this. We haven't even touched upon the regulatory framework that's going to be required, to enable these emerging therapies. But no time today. I know the organizers would like to have some concluding remarks from my side. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your thoughts today. Really helpful. Again, to the attendees, particularly patients and parents of loved ones affected by mitochondrial disease. I think back 20 years ago, no companies active in therapeutic development. 10 years ago, one company active developing therapeutic. 5 years ago, a handful. And now we have here in 2023, we've had a dozen companies conduct clinical trials. And more importantly, there are dozens of companies preclinical stage that I've had contact with, that many in the clinical community have had contact with, that want to develop therapeutics for mitochondrial disease. This is an exciting time. We are just at the early stages, the nascent stages of getting therapies for mitochondrial disease, but they're coming. We're working at it. So please take that message and importantly, consider how you can be engaged in clinical research, because absent patient involvement in clinical research, we will never get to the therapies that we want. So I'll stop there. I don't know if Marty is going to come back on or one of the others, but again, thank you all for your comments today, and I've really enjoyed being a part of this.
Thank you for having us, Phil.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, guys. That was a really exciting conversation, and definitely in the spirit of Mitochondrial Disease Awareness Week. So we've heard today, a whole trajectory from where we are, right, with the clinical trials, where we're at with moving towards precision. How do we deliver therapies, even if people don't qualify for clinical trials, working with the pharmacies to get them, working with the companies to get them, while they're in the process of being developed, so even earlier, and if they might just fit to their specific disease. And then the emerging therapies, as Phil said, we went from nearly no robust, effective clinical trials more than a decade ago to really a series. As you heard Sarah Nguyen share with us today, we went from very few companies working in the space. I shared on Monday during our Mito Education Day at CHOP, and again, that recording will become live. There's dozens of companies in both primary mitochondrial disease and other disorders affected by mitochondria or secondary mitochondrial diseases that might affect a much larger population, although it may not be the original cause. In the mitochondria, as we heard, the mitochondria are very adaptive, and they are often sustaining our lives, but there are ways that potentially we can help them, either from a causal perspective, and we heard about some gene editing today, and there's of course some cell therapy being developed in this space, as well as different